Welcome back to the deep dive. This is where we take some pretty dense source material, articles, research, philosophy, and really try to boil it down into, well, genuine insight you can actually use. Today, we're opening up a stack of sources, pulling together some pretty heavyweight philosophical and psychological ideas, trying to define what a meaningful life really looks like. And our mission today is, I'd say, exceptionally provocative. We're analyzing this core argument that runs through all this material. The idea that we don't just get to pursue a better life, it's saying we have a fundamental moral obligation to pursue truth and adventure.
Yeah, that phrase moral obligation, that's really the key distinction here, isn't it?
It really jumps out.
It does, because the sources, they aren't treating this like, optional advice, like a tip for maybe maximizing happiness or something. No, they present it as an imperative, a kind of duty, really, to maximize your own potential and the truth you bring into the world. And they define the stakes pretty clearly right away.
What happens if you ignore it?
Well, if you fail to pursue truth and adventure, they argue the trajectory is, predictable. It's a descent into bitterness and eventually cynicism.
And that's a heavy consequence. But, I find their take on cynicism itself really fascinating. Because most people, I think, treat cynicism as like the final stage of disillusionment, the absolute worst outcome. But these sources, they offer quite a nuanced view here.
They absolutely do, yeah. They clarify that cynicism is actually presented as, well, a temporary, even intellectual improvement over just sheer naivety.
An improvement. How so?
Well, if you're naive, right, you just accept things at face value. Surface-level pleasantries, no questions asked. But if you become cynical, you've at least started to recognize that, okay, the world is more complicated, it's harsher, often less fair than you first thought. You've sort of stepped past just being blind.
Okay, so it's like a painful awakening then. The sources seem to argue that this initial cynicism, it signals that a person has started questioning things, which is an active phase, even if it's uncomfortable.
That's the critical distinction, yeah. It implies engagement, some level of thought. And this is crucial. They are really explicit that this cannot be the final stop.
It's not the destination.
Definitely not. Cynicism, in their view, is like the intellectual equivalent of standing in the rubble after a building collapsed. Okay, you recognize the structure was flawed, great. But you haven't yet committed to building something new, something better.
I see.
It's a waypoint defined purely by rejection, not the sustainable, active place for an informed person to live. To stay cynical is basically to refuse the next obligation, which is to build truth.
Okay. So let's unpack this path then, because moving from, naivety through that discomfort of cynicism and then towards genuine wisdom, well, that needs a deliberate strategy, right?
Absolutely.
And the sources seem to emphasize one foundational requirement for this whole process: humility.
Humility is the cornerstone. They really hammer this point. Because without it, you just can't achieve the main way you acquire wisdom, which, they say, is confronting your own ignorance.
Confronting ignorance.
Yeah. And this isn't about being, meek or self-deprecating in a false way. It's the active, sometimes really excruciating process of recognizing where your internal map just doesn't match the actual territory out there.
Okay.
That kind of radical self-honesty. Seeing what you don't know, and maybe where your most cherished assumptions are actually failing you, that is the pathway, they argue, to building something truthful.
That sounds, deceptively simple on the surface. Just admit you might be wrong. But I guess the fact that the material spends so much time on the avoidance paths tells us how psychologically difficult this confrontation must actually be.
Oh, absolutely.
They detail two major diversions people take to sort of dodge the pain of correcting themselves.
Yeah, and these two diversions are, I think, highly relevant today. When you're facing the moment of, let's call it intellectual friction, that challenge to self-correct, many people will instinctively, reach for the easy stabilizers. The first big one they detail is developing a false persona.
Right. Building up a facade. So you start being a seeker of truth, and you start being like a zealous defender of some idealized self-image you've created.
Exactly that. Think of the person who clings really rigidly to their job title, maybe, or their political label, or even their role within a family. Not because it represents actual competence or deep belief anymore, but because it masks that underlying anxiety of ignorance. The false persona, it becomes this protective shell. And if you're constantly defending a projected image, well, you can't risk taking in new information that might shatter that image, can you?
No, you'd be trapped.
You become trapped by your own defense mechanisms.
Yeah. Okay, and the second major diversion seems almost like the opposite approach.
Mm.
Not building a rigid shell, but kind of dissolving the problem through distraction.
That's the one. Hedonism and short-term gratification, this is just pure avoidance. If confronting your own contradictions, the fact that your internal reality is maybe flawed, if that causes pain, well, you simply anesthetize that pain. You drown the discomfort of internal contradiction in immediate, fleeting pleasure. Could be endless digital entertainment, excessive consumption, just pure escapism, whatever works.
So the sources reject both of these paths equally strongly. Why? Is it because they're basically emotional stabilizers that stop intellectual movement?
That's a perfect way to put it.
The false persona blocks external feedback, and hedonism stops you sitting with the discomfort you need for internal reflection.
That's the synthesis, exactly. They are explicit that both mechanisms are basically designed to prevent the genuine attainment of wisdom. They stabilize your emotional state, sure, but at the cost of any real intellectual growth. So you're left effectively stagnant, right? Clinging either to a lie or maybe just a distraction and never moving beyond that temporary cynicism we talked about earlier.
That's really intriguing because as soon as we start talking about humility and ignorance, the focus seems to shift quite dramatically.
Yeah.
Away from the purely internal world and towards, well, external engagement. The sources raise this fundamental, really critical question that sort of bridges internal development with your external life. Where are identity and sanity actually found? Are they just purely internal states? Something you achieve through, I don't know, affirmation or positive thinking alone?
And this is where the material really pushes back quite hard against some, let's say, contemporary assumptions.
Okay.
The sources are pretty definitive on this. Identity and sanity are found not merely in your internal subjective feelings, but in concordance with the world.
Concordance. Okay, that idea feels vital. We should probably spend a moment on that. If I'm getting the source material right, concordance means your internal subjective map perfectly matches the external objective territory that you're actually navigating. Is that it?
Precisely, yeah. It means your actions, your competence, your self-assessment, they all align with how the real world actually responds to you. And what's fascinating is that the sources explicitly reject the idea that just feeling good about yourself is enough for sanity. If your internal map says, I'm a great architect, but, every building you design collapses, well, your sanity is challenged, regardless of how confident you might feel inside. Identity, therefore, has to be grounded in reality.
And the material gets specific about the required actions, the tangible things you need to do to achieve this external grounding, this concordance.
Yeah.
It's not meditation or just affirmation, is it? It's responsibility and relationship.
Absolutely. Responsibility means actually taking ownership of specific tasks, duties, consequences in the real world, things with measurable outcomes. And relationship means authentic engagement with other people, where your ideas and your actions are actually tested against another consciousness, another perspective.
Yeah.
These are the kind of physical ways you align your internal state with external reality, because they provide constant, often undeniable feedback.
Right.
If you're responsible for something, the results are usually measurable. If you're in a real relationship, the feedback can be pretty immediate.
So, okay, if you choose that path of concordance, of genuine responsibility in relationship, that pretty much guarantees you're going to encounter friction, right?
Oh, inevitably.
If your subjective internal map doesn't perfectly match the external feedback you get, well, that's going to be a painful moment sometimes. But the sources seem to suggest we shouldn't just tolerate this friction. We should actually welcome it.
Yeah, they sort of pivot the whole idea of conflict and criticism. They discuss the, surprising usefulness of criticism, even adversarial interactions. We often instinctively treat criticism as a threat, don't we? A signal to retreat, something that threatens our identity.
Sure feels bad.
It does. But the argument here is that we should perhaps seek it out, or at least be grateful for it when it appears, because it's valuable data.
I wonder if that connects back to what you said about the fear of confronting ignorance.
I think it does.
If we spend all that energy building a false persona to avoid admitting we were wrong, then naturally, criticism feels catastrophic. So what makes adversarial interaction a productive tool, according to them?
Well, it's the mechanism for earning wisdom. That's the key phrase they use. The material suggests wisdom isn't some passive state you just achieve through comfortable contemplation. It's acquired through struggle, through feedback, through that confrontation with external reality that tells you exactly where your internal map is wrong. Adversarial interaction, provided, of course, it's focused on finding truth, not just winning it, forces you to articulate, to test, and to defend your assumptions. If they survive that test, great, they're strengthened. If they fail, well, you must correct them to stay aligned with reality.
So so what here for the learner, for someone trying to apply this,
Mm.
is that these challenging interactions, they provide two specific crucial benefits. Maybe they're like required payments for genuine understanding.
That's a great way to think about it. Yes. First, they serve as a means of immediate, practical self-improvement. They highlight the blind spots, the things you literally can't see yourself because they exist outside your current sphere of awareness. Someone else challenges a basic premise you've never even thought to question.
Right, that external perspective.
Exactly. And second, maybe more profoundly, they are the method for earning wisdom. It's like if your knowledge hasn't been tested in the fires of criticism or reality, it's maybe just theoretical belief. It's not embodied understanding. True critical thinking, they argue, requires accepting this external friction as a non-negotiable step towards competence and ultimately towards that concordance we talked about.
Wow, okay. That perspective, it entirely reframes responsibility, doesn't it?
It does.
It turns responsibility not just into some heavy duty, but into the necessary adventure where truth is actually found. We started this whole deep dive talking about the moral obligation to pursue truth and adventure. It seems like the adventure is the struggle to establish concordance.
Absolutely. The adventure is the active engagement with the world, with all its challenges and feedback. And the core loop we've sort of analyzed today, it demands that continuous, rigorous effort. You can't just do it once.
That's ongoing.
It's ongoing. A meaningful existence, according to these sources, requires that moral drive toward truth. And you achieve it by combining that internal humility, the readiness to confront your own ignorance with external engagement through responsibility and relationship, which inevitably brings testing and friction and learning.
That entire structure,
Mm-hmm.
starting from the maybe temporary clarity of cynicism, moving through to the hard-won wisdom earned through confrontation, it feels deeply cohesive. It suggests that stagnation, just staying still, is the real failure, not making errors along the way.
Precisely. Errors are course corrections. Stagnation is refusing the journey. So if identity and sanity are fundamentally found in concordance with the world, right, and that concordance is established and maintained by embracing responsibility and actually receiving, maybe even welcoming genuine criticism, well, then this raises a pretty profound question for you listening to consider.
Hmm.
What specific assumption about yourself, maybe about your competence, maybe your character or your future path, what assumption are you currently shielding, maybe avoiding external criticism on? And perhaps more practically, what specific responsibility are you maybe hesitating to take on right now? Something that would immediately ground your existence, provide that feedback, and move you out of the, let's say, temporary comfort of cynicism or avoidance and into the difficult, yes, but ultimately earned wisdom of the adventure, that pursuit, that active engagement. That's the obligation.